Hi everybody, my name's Elaine and I'm going to be talking to you today about teaching and traveling around the world. So let's begin. A little bit of information about me. I'm a high school teacher of English language and literature. I've been teaching for around 20 years. I've lived and worked in 6 countries and I've traveled to 65 countries at the last count. So I think some of you have some questions about those that I can hopefully answer for you a little bit later as well. So yes, I love to travel. I'm going to talk a little bit now in my talk to you about why I love to travel and how I travel. So let's begin. One of my favorite quotations is this one from Mark Twain. He's an author I'm sure some of you are familiar with. And as a literature teacher, I think travel and literature are very connected for me. So I like that this quotation about traveling is by an author. He says, 20 years from now, you will be more disappointed by the things you didn't do than by the ones you did do. And then the quotation goes on to say, explore, dream, discover. And those 3 words there I've sort of taken as my mantra in life a little bit. I love to explore, I love to dream of new places that I want to go to, and I love to organize it and go and discover those places. So I've always found that quotation very inspiring, and I hope to inspire a little bit of that in you today as well. So let's get into it. Where have I worked? I'm originally a teacher from the UK, so of course I started off teaching in Northampton, right in the middle of the UK, many years ago, around 20 years ago. From there, I've also taught in Tokyo, Japan. I've taught in Ho Chi Minh City in Vietnam. I've taught in Mumbai in India, and I've taught in Bratislava, Slovakia. And now my base is in Sweden. I've taught in Stockholm. I don't actually live in Stockholm now. I think I'll be telling you a little bit more about where I live on the next slide. But yes, I've worked in some very, very varied and exciting places. Right now, I'm in a place called Gävle in Sweden. It's about 2 hours by train north of Stockholm. It's perhaps not a city that most people commonly travel to when they visit Sweden. But one of the nice things about traveling actually is traveling to places beyond the usual places. We have a tendency to travel to the capital cities, but always remember, countries are so much more than just their capital cities. So always look for other places that you can go. So this is Gävle, Sweden. The photograph in the background is a photograph I took a couple of weeks back, or a couple of months back now, probably. It's quite rare for us to see the Northern Lights here, but we did have a very lucky night a few months back and I managed to get that photograph. So there are some really cool things in Gävle, Sweden that are worth coming to see. I'll be talking a little bit more about Sweden later. So let's move on then. So in this speech specifically, I'm going to talk about 3 of the places I've worked in. I'd love to tell you more about all of them, but we wouldn't have time for that. So I'm going to focus on Vietnam, India, and Sweden. And I'm hoping to talk you through a little bit what I did while I was there, how it is to travel there, things to enjoy and things to look out for, because, you know, we always want to make sure when we're traveling that we're doing it in a way that keeps us safe and is respectful to the country that you're visiting as well, because that's a really important thing. So let's begin there, because I think that's probably the biggest lesson we learn when we are traveling. We're learning about other cultures, we're learning about other people, other countries, how they operate, how they think about things. And, you know, you may have seen this diagram before, the cultural iceberg. It's quite a famous diagram. But what it really shows is how we can learn about and, more importantly, appreciate cultures that are very different to our own, and even cultures that seem very similar to our own. Once you dig a little bit deeper, sometimes you find that actually there are some interesting differences as well. So just like an iceberg, if any of you know anything about science, in an iceberg, there's 10% of the ice is what you can see above the surface of the water, but 90% of it is floating beneath the surface of the water. There's a lot more than you can see. And culture is the same. When we go to a new country, we see things straight away. There are things that are really obvious for us to see and experience. We can see the flag, we can see the clothes that people are wearing, the fashion, we can see and eat the food, we can hear the language, we can attend dance exhibitions or art exhibitions, things like that. And there's a lot that we can see and hear and experience very, very immediately. And that's one of the really exciting things about travelers as well, of course. So these are behaviors and things that are accessible to our senses. We can hear them, we can see them, and a lot of them are sort of taught behaviors as well, cuisine, and these are the way we cook certain meals, or this is the way we celebrate certain festivals. A lot of it is sort of very conscious and very taught. And that's what we sort of say is the what of the culture, what we can see, hear and experience. But if we want to go beyond that, and we do, because respect for other cultures comes from understanding more than the surface level. So if we dig a little deeper, we go below the surface, we think about the attitudes and the beliefs and the expectations or the values, the things that you can't see immediately, but they're there beneath the surface, and these might be things like rituals. How does that culture react to death? That's a really fascinating study that, all different countries have different rituals for birth, for marriage, for death, for those sort of huge life cycle things. The behavior of the people, how they think about things, and more importantly, why they think about those things. So to really respect and understand a culture, we have to get below that surface level of, look at the clothes, taste the food, find the flag on a map, those sorts of things, which, of course, they're great fun to do those things as well. So when you're traveling, always sort of think about how much you're learning about that culture, and, in what ways is it similar to yours? In what ways is it different? And what common ground do you have? Because there always is common ground, of course. So, appreciating that is really a big step in traveling respectfully. So let's have a look at my personal experience. I worked at the British International School in Ho Chi Minh City for 4 years. And this was one of the first international schools I really worked at. And it was a very different school to what I was used to in the UK, where I was teaching British children. And then I went to this school where, I was teaching multicultural. There was 47 or 50 different nationalities in my school. And of course, if you think about that cultural iceberg, that's a lot of things underneath the surface that you want to try and understand. They were very hard-working, goal-driven students. It was a nice school with some smallish classes, 24 students in a class. And they had a really active social community. They really cared about doing good in the local community. Not so many of the students came from Vietnam, but the common thing that all of those 47 nationalities had was they all cared about Vietnam. We were all living there, and we all wanted to leave a positive footprint. I mean, we were living there, but none of us were going to live there forever. But we wanted to make sure we sort of left something that was better than when we arrived. You want to try and add to a community. So there was a lot of, we did a lot of active social communities, a lot of fundraising, helping to build schools and things like that. It was a lot of fun, but there are challenges when you travel and when you teach. I don't know if any of you are thinking about being teachers, but when you are teaching, you have to think about where the other person is coming from, what they understand. And, sometimes we have differences in language. I taught a poem about the autumn. It was called To Autumn. And I talked all about how beautiful the autumn is, a season, spring, summer, autumn, winter. However, I didn't realize till the end of my lesson that many of my students grew up with American English, and the word autumn is actually fall. So they did not know what I was talking about. And, you know, being aware sometimes when there are miscommunications, it's not because the other person is not very clever or they just don't understand you. It's often because there are communication misunderstandings. Another example I was talking about a book where a main character is called Snowball, and so I asked them about snowballs and they didn't know what I was talking about because they hadn't seen snow. Vietnam doesn't get very much snow. So the target language can sometimes be an obstacle, but of course understanding that is a way through it. It's a way forward. You know, changing your language sometimes to help the person you're speaking to, you know, understand and access the information you're giving them. And of course, another challenge was understanding how different nationalities study. Now, of course, we're all different even within our own nationalities as well. But there are some nationalities who are very used to very, very rigorous study and maybe sort of rote learning, going through the same things over and over again. And there are others who are perhaps more familiar with more independent study or more project-based study. So again, it's trying to breach that different ground, but everybody has the same goal. And that's the really important thing to remember. Everybody was there to study, but we all study in different ways. And sometimes our culture, where we're from, plays into that. So as a teacher and as a person, it's really important to try and think about where other people's sort of cultural differences are and find that common ground, because it is there. So Vietnam is a beautiful, beautiful country to visit. You can do all sorts of things. There's all sorts of adventure. You can go mountain biking through the jungle, mountain biking through beautiful sort of mountain roads. You can go to Ha Long Bay, where the picture of that boat is, beautiful water and sort of rocks in the, absolutely stunning. You can go to the Mekong Delta and learn about how, you know, traditional Vietnamese fishing. I mean, fishing is a huge part of Vietnamese life, how that works, how that operates. You can even explore the largest cave in the world. So there's so much you can do for adventure. Art, culture, and history. I mean, we all, you know, we're all familiar with the Vietnam War. That's one of the things people sort of think about. Oh, Vietnam War. It's a connection we make. And of course, that's an important connection to explore. It has shaped their history massively, and it's shaped their culture. The culture they have now has moved from how it would have been if that hadn't happened. So, you know, you have to look at these things. But remember, Vietnam is more than a war that happened decades ago. It had history way beyond that. You could go and visit the water puppet performances. These are very popular in Hanoi, the capital. And these celebrate folk tales, the old stories of Vietnam. So that's a really nice historical activity to do as well. Celebrations, they celebrate the Lunar New Year like many other countries around Asia do. They call it the Tet. There are some connections with some of their festivals to their specific history as well. So find out about the celebrations, find out where they are celebrated, find out what they do and how they do it. And, you know, really sort of see, because celebrations and festivals are a great way to learning about a culture. I could talk a long time about all the amazing things to do about Vietnam, but I would run out of time. So when you're traveling, there are always things to be aware of. I don't want these to come across as negatives, because they're not negatives. Every country comes with potential things that we want to avoid. Every country, there's nowhere that would be free from that. So things in Vietnam, you can sometimes perhaps get a taxi scam. There are some taxis who do try and look for travelers and foreigners, and when you go in there, the charges are a little bit higher, the meter runs a little bit faster. It's not a dangerous scam, you won't get hurt, it may just cost a little bit of extra money, and actually not really that much money in sort of bigger terms, but you want to be aware of it. There are very, very many reputable taxis. So find out, ask at your hotel, ask at your guest house, ask a local friend if you have one. How do I know? Because they know. The biggest piece of advice I'm going to give you today is, ask somebody who lives there, ask a local. We have Facebook groups now as well that you can join to ask people questions like this. The legitimate taxis are usually really easy to spot. And actually, I found my sort of little tip was the more they shout out at you and say, taxi, 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 probably the more likely they are to be a scam. So I would go and find the taxi a little bit further away, where the taxi driver is just sitting patiently waiting, and they're probably going to be a more legitimate taxi. But ask locals, because they'll always tell you. Language can be difficult in Vietnam. There is some spoken English, but don't expect it to be very, very widespread. And of course, Japanese, I have no idea. I doubt there's much Japanese at all. People in hotels and hostels and some restaurants will speak English, and you will find some menus that you can read and things. But taxi drivers, people out, if you take tours out to the Mekong Delta, for example, you may find that English is a little less common, but it's not that problematic. You'll be amazed how much sign language, pointing, usually asking somebody nearby who might have a bit more Vietnamese than you do or a bit more English than they do. You can find your way, so it's definitely not something to put you off going there. Pickpocketing and bag snatching. This is any city in any country. This is not just Vietnam. This is something you should always be aware of. The busier the place, the more likely it is to have a high number of tourists. Just keep your bag in front of you, keep a hand over your zipper on your bag, don't put your wallet and your phone in your back pocket. This is just sensible common advice. It's not specific to Vietnam at all. It's sadly one of those things that can happen anywhere, although I know Japan not so often. You are so lucky you live in such a country where these things are not so common, but just be aware elsewhere they can happen. Number 4, haggling, bartering. This is not actually a negative at all. This can be a load of fun. When you're in a market and there's no prices on the things you're looking at, you are able to haggle. They give a price, you give a price, you agree on a price that sort of makes you happy. Do it. Don't be afraid of it. Have fun. They expect it. They enjoy it as well. Just keep in mind a couple of things. People in places like the markets and things like that probably don't have the finances you do. You probably have more than they do. So be fair. Make sure they're not walking away empty-handed or disappointed. Make haggling fun, but just make sure that you are I didn't mean to change my screen then and that you are allowing them to survive as well. But ask a local, again, go back to that, ask a local, what should these things cost? What is roughly the price? What should I expect to pay? Have an idea before you go to the market of what you want to buy and how much it should be, so that you know that you're both happy with the outcome. Okay, right. Just keeping an eye on time because I really don't want to go over too long. Let's just quickly talk about India. Very, very, very different to Vietnam. It's very easy to sort of look at our world and go, Europe, America, Asia, and sort of put countries into these big, huge continent boxes. But that does not mean the countries have that same cultural background by any means. And Mumbai is similar kind of geographical region to Vietnam on a loose scale, but a very, very different experience. This was a very local school. It was an international school, but actually all of our students were Indian, actually very affluent, wealthy Indian families. And mostly this was right in the heart of Bollywood. I don't know if you've heard of Bollywood, India's film industry, but many of my students there were the children of big Bollywood stars, and they will become big Bollywood stars themselves. So it was a little bit like being in a celebrity school. And it was challenging. There was a high competitive culture, much more so in Vietnam. In Vietnam, I found that all of my students there, because we had so many different cultures, they sort of celebrated successes for each other. In India, I found there was a very big competitive culture, and that sometimes really sort of drove the students' motivations forward. You know, sometimes they would forget a little bit because they would be so focused on, you know, the goal they had, that sometimes it might not occur to them what goals other people have. And a lot of this was, I'm just going to skip to that third bullet point at the bottom of the challenges. In India, it's a really big thing to be a doctor or a lawyer. They are seen as the sort of highest level careers. Social status, the second bullet point there, is really important in India. They have a very ingrained social system. You may have heard it as the caste system. It has changed. It's progressed from what it was before, when it was very restrictive. It still exists to some extent. And to be a lawyer or to be a doctor is kind of what most parents want for their children. So there's a real hard drive to get students studying maths and biology and business or law. And that could be difficult sometimes, because some of the students didn't want to do those things, you know, and they had a very, you know, in India, and I think this does occur in a lot of other Asian cultures as well, respecting the parents and doing what the parents want is often more important than your own goals and dreams. So that could be difficult, because the students I taught were progressive, younger generation who didn't always want the same things. So that was an interesting issue that I had to overcome sometimes. But India is an amazing country. There is so much to do. Again, like Vietnam, loads of great nature, beaches and mountains and things like that. But we've talked about nature. So I'm looking at some things here that are very specific to India as well. Religion is a huge part of Indian culture, as it is many countries. But what's very different about India is the number of religions. There are so many different religions, and very, very different in their outlook and their beliefs as well. And they are all sort of together in this very densely populated country. And so the festivals, there's many festivals, because there's festivals for each different sort of religion, or each different branch of a religion as well. Varanasi, I think, is probably the most well-known one, on the Ganges, the holy river. Varanasi is where the many people have funerals. So if you want to sort of really think about how Indians approach their approaches to life and death, Varanasi really is a very confronting place to do that. You will see funerals, you will see bodies, and it's very different to perhaps how we see, you know, in the UK, for example, funerals are very private, you know, just the family, you know, whereas in India, it's very public. But that helps us understand a culture as well. You can practice yoga at an ashram in Rishikesh. India is the home of yoga, and many, you know, many other religious things you can do there as well. So really interesting to get a feel for that if you're in India. Color. One of the things I love about India is how much color, wearing lots of colors, festivals with lots of colors. The festival here in the picture, literally, they're putting colored paints on your faces as a celebration of color. Beautiful festival. The festivals in India really are very vibrant and very fun to experience. And if you can experience it with local people as well, not like one that's been put on for tourists, that's even better. Street food. Now, this one is one that people are a bit afraid of in India. They think, oh, I'm going to get sick. You can eat street food in India. Just be aware of a couple of things. The street food in India is delicious. I can't speak highly enough of it. I ate it almost every day, and I didn't get sick. Just be careful where you go. The busier the place is, the better. because the food is sitting out on the street. India is quite a hot country. If it's been sitting out for a couple of hours, then that's how bacteria grows and things like that. So look at the stands. Is there a long line of people? Are they freshly cooking the food and bringing it out and serving? If they are, you're probably okay to eat that. The more sort of, the less time the food is in the little stand, the less likely it is going to make you sick. And just, you know, if it's fried, it's probably okay because most things can survive being fried. So, you know, but do eat it. Again, ask a local person, where is the best place for me to go and eat street food? Because you shouldn't miss out on it because you're worried about getting sick. Absolutely, it's a fantastic experience, and you'll really enjoy the food and the tastes and the flavors, because India is, the spices and the flavors are just fantastic. Things to be aware of in India. It is a poor country. It's rich and it's poor. And the poverty is very confronting. It can be very hard to look at. It can be very hard to experience. Make sure you go in with that sort of open mind. People who are begging for survival on the streets in India, they're not nuisances, they're not pests, they're not, you know, they deserve our sympathy, they deserve our empathy, they don't deserve our judgment. And that's really, really important. Nobody wants to live in poverty. It's not a choice. But of course, you have to be careful. You can't solve the poverty problem. You can't give money to everybody you see. You know, it's difficult to know what you should and shouldn't do. Again, I'm just going to fall back on my ask a local person. What would they do? What do the locals do? How do they help? Is it better to contribute to a charity or spend some time working with a charity? You know, how do they deal with that, and what do they suggest, you know? But it can be difficult. So just if you visit India, be aware that could be very hard for you to see. Language, you'll have no issues in India. English is a national language, so most people speak some kind of English. Maybe a tuk-tuk driver might not be as fluent as others, but in the shops, in the hotels, people on the street, you know, even if you're in a tuk-tuk and the driver doesn't speak English, you can probably stop someone on the side of the street and very quickly find someone who does. So I think traveling around India is very easy for that reason. Food poisoning, again, this could be India, it could be anywhere else. If you ever get sick while you're traveling and you suspect it's food poisoning, obviously, you know, go and see a doctor. That's always the best thing to do. But just try and preempt it. In India, don't drink the water. Use bottled water. Check that the bottled water hasn't already been opened. Don't eat salad, because you don't know if they've washed it in the water. You know, eat freshly cooked food that you've seen cooked in front of you. But if you do get sick, then, you know, go and see a doctor there. Ask at your hotel, they will help you straight away. If you do have just a bit of a stomach sickness and you don't think it's too serious, I've been told flat Coke. So Coca-Cola, let it go flat, like shake it, but don't open it after you've shaken it, and let it go flat and a bit warm. And I've been told that's actually very good to soothe your stomach. Traffic, it's not a problem, but there's a lot of it. So just watch when you're crossing the road, because it is a bit crazy. It's fun, but you know, it moves very slowly, so you don't need to worry too much. Okay, I know I'm rushing through this a bit, but I do want to keep this relatively short, and I'm just keeping an eye on the time. So Stockholm, totally different. Stockholm, Sweden, totally different. This was a bilingual school. It wasn't an international school. It was a local school that teaches some lessons in English as well as Swedish. Sweden has a very interesting system. They have a free school system. Any student can choose to go to any school they want to, and anybody can set up a school in Sweden. Any organization can. So a very different system here. I don't have time to talk to you more about it, but it is a fascinating system. We did have big classes, 32 students in a class, which of course has its own issues. But the thing about Sweden is their whole system is very much focused on wellness. Not just your academic health, but your mental health and your physical health. So at a school in Sweden, expect a lot of emphasis on physical sports, and a lot of emphasis on things like meditation or counseling and talking to people or taking time out to look after yourself. Yes, even not doing homework if you want to have a rest. In fact, they very rarely even give homework in Stockholm, in Sweden, because they believe children should be going home and spending time with their family, not going home to do more study. That's how important mental health and wellness is in Sweden. So if you like the sound of not so much homework, Sweden's the place to come. Challenges, the behavior sometimes in a big class can be difficult. That's not a Swedish problem, that's just a problem sometimes in big classes. Handling of COVID-19, again, I don't have time to go into this so much, unfortunately. But Sweden is one of the only countries that had no lockdown, had no masks, had no social distancing particularly. Like there was no rules and regulations. The schools didn't close, they stayed open the whole time. And I'm not going to comment on whether that was a success or not. If you are interested in it and you look it up, you'll see that it's very divided. Some people think it was good for Sweden. Some people think it was very bad for Sweden. What's interesting is culturally, they chose a different approach. And it was because of culture. This is what a lot of people didn't understand. They just thought, why is Sweden not doing the same as everybody else? But Sweden has things in their culture that are different. They're very, very quickly, their sort of political constitution actually doesn't allow the government to lock down the country. So the government didn't have the power to lock down the country. And it wasn't that they just wanted to ignore COVID. It was just that culturally there were some differences that meant it was more difficult for Sweden to do that. If you're interested, Google it and have a look at it. It's quite an interesting comparison to how COVID was treated elsewhere. What can you do? Loads of nature, mountains, beaches, forests, beautiful forests. You can go and see the northern lights like in that picture. You can swim in a lake at midnight in the full sun in the north because it does not get dark in the summer and it does not get light in the winter. So that's totally weird if you've never seen that before. Culture, again, some amazing festivals. They have a lot of festivals that celebrate the weather. In Sweden, the weather is really important. They have very cold winters and long, warm summers. And so they have festivals to celebrate the beginning of summer, the end of summer, the beginning of spring, the end of spring, midsummer, the solstice. They're very, very interested in festivals that celebrate, you know, those sort of weather patterns and nature. History, you can go and see the world's most perfectly preserved warship. It sunk many years ago and now it's in a museum and it still looks exactly the same as it did a few hundred years ago. That's really cool. And Vikings. Sweden is the home of Vikings. So you can go and see some really, really old history in Sweden. Things to be aware of. There's no cash in Sweden. We do have cash, but they're trying to become the world's first cashless society. So we pay for everything on credit card, debit card, and apps. You can't even get on a bus without an app. So if you do come to Sweden, just be aware, do your research before you come because your cash will be refused in a lot of places in Sweden. The language is easy. Swedes speak absolutely beautiful English all the time. So you'd have no issues communicating in English. You might even be lucky and find someone who speaks Japanese. You never know. The long summer nights I've already talked about, in the winter in the north, where you can see in that picture there, the lowest sun there is sort of midnight. The sun doesn't go down, so that's beautiful. And just in any country where the traffic is coming from a different direction to Japan, remember to look the right way when you're crossing a road so that you don't get hit by a car. So again, it's not a nuisance or something to worry about, but it's something just to be aware of. So just to finish up then, travel and literature, I said at the beginning, I think in my mind, they're very connected. They're both about stories. They're both about people. They're both about lives that are different to yours. The quotation there about travel says, travel opens your heart, it broadens your mind, and it fills your life with stories to tell. I love that. I love traveling. I love seeing people's stories. I love speaking to people. I love speaking to taxi drivers, the people who are doing the fishing, the people who are working in the market, the people who work in the hotels and the hostels. You know, how is your life in Vietnam or India or Japan or wherever you are? They all have stories that are so different to your story. Spend time listening to their stories and learning about their stories. And reading, for me, reading does the same thing. The quotation there says, reading is the sole means by which we slip involuntarily, often helplessly, into another's skin, another's voice, another's soul. That's just a very fancy way of saying when you're reading, you become somebody else. You live somebody else's life. You see the world through somebody else's eyes. And to me, that's just really, really exciting. I want to live a million lifetimes while I'm here. I want to live the lifestyles of the lifetimes, not lifestyles maybe, of everybody I meet when I travel. So just to finish up then, what does traveling do? Travel is fatal to prejudice, bigotry, and narrow-mindedness. We began with Mark Twain, we're finishing with Mark Twain. I love this quotation. The more you travel, the more open-minded you become. The more you see below the flags and the clothes and the food, the more you see, you know, the recipes that led to the food they eat now, the evolution of cuisine, the way the cuisine changes according to different regions within in the country. It's not just a dish, a Vietnamese dish, but it's a Vietnamese dish with a history of from this culture or this region. You know, you become more understanding. So that little checklist there on the side, traveling makes us respectful, more understanding, more open-minded, fairer, more tolerant, kinder, more liberal, and more knowledgeable. And for me, that's why I travel. That's why I want to see the world. And I really, really hope that you do too. Thank you so much for listening. It was really great to speak to you today, and I hope you get out there and travel. Enjoy. Thank you, everybody. Bye.